Earlier, I spoke with our congressional correspondent, Nancy Cortez, who was at the retreat.
I would say, Elaine, he was received warmly, respectfully. It was not the kind of raucous welcome you would expect from a gathering of Republican lawmakers after their party had just won the White House and the new inhabitant of that White House was coming to sort of do a victory lap and talk to them. It was more subdued. And the reason for that is that while they share a lot of priorities with this president on a few big issues, they do diverge, trade being one of them, torture being another. Not universally, but there are a lot of Republicans who don't feel the same way that he does. And they're simply nervous because they've seen time after time, just in this first week, the president pushing some of these unfounded views. They end up having to answer for those views. They end up getting asked whether they feel the same way, and that's a pretty uncomfortable place to be. So this relationship, which is still forming, has some challenges that both the president and Congress is going to have to overcome.
Well, Nancy, the president touched on many topics in his speech. What stood out to you, and what stood out for legislators there, for lawmakers?
What stood out to me was that he basically started the speech, and Elaine, if you see some activity behind me, it's because there is a protest going by us here in Philadelphia right now, along with Republican lawmakers. There are hundreds of protesters who have gathered here to make their feelings known. They've got signs that say Nazi scum and resist. They were just chanting my body, my choice. They are primarily here to protest against Mr. Trump and his party's desire to dismantle Obamacare, but there are a host of issues that they want to protest as well. And we've seen these protests popping up sporadically throughout the day. They've been outside of the hotel where GOP lawmakers were meeting with Donald Trump, and this is probably going to be a frequent feature in the early days of this presidency.
On another issue, Nancy, the White House said it's considering imposing a tax on imports from Mexico, and this comes as Mr. Trump says he and the Mexican president decided to forego their meeting scheduled for later this month. Let's listen to some sound.
The President of Mexico and myself have agreed to cancel our planned meeting scheduled for next week. Unless Mexico is going to treat the United States fairly, with respect, such a meeting would be fruitless, and I want to go a different route. We have no choice.
Nancy, what are you hearing? Are there some concerns not just about a possible tax, but also about a souring of ties with one of the U.S.'s biggest trading partners?
There is some concern, and that kind of gets back to the unease that we discussed in the beginning of our conversation, Elaine. There are Republican lawmakers who worry that Mr. Trump is needlessly provoking one of our biggest trading partners. And because trade is an issue where a lot of Republicans already diverge with the president, they are by and large free traders, and he's saying he wants to renegotiate all these trade deals. This is an area where they have a bit of frustration. As far as how this wall gets paid for, they're kind of taking a wait-and-see attitude. They're highly skeptical that there's a way to force Mexico to retroactively pay for this wall. They know that the White House is floating a variety of options, but many Republicans, even the ones who are excited about building a wall, assume that at the end of the day it's going to be the U.S. taxpayer who foots the bill, no matter what the president said on the campaign trail.
Nancy, President Trump was supposed to sign an executive action on Thursday to launch a probe into alleged voter fraud, but it's been postponed. Some lawmakers are opposed to the idea. What's the general feeling you're getting about this possible investigation?
They're not interested, especially in a congressional investigation. Members of his own party almost universally think that he is making this up. They say there's no proof for it. They're not saying that voter fraud is non-existent, but they don't see any evidence of massive voter fraud. And Mr. Trump's own lawyers said in a filing over the recounts in Michigan and Wisconsin that there was no evidence of widespread voter fraud. And so this is one of those things that Republicans would like to just be able to put behind them and not talk about, because it's troubling that the president would continue to cling to a view for which there is no evidence. But that is really going to be up to the president himself. Leaders here in Congress have already said they're not going to do a big congressional investigation into voter fraud. fraud. The president could probably instruct his Department of Justice to do an investigation, but as far as Capitol Hill, their preference would be to stay out of it.
All right. Nancy Cordes at the GOP retreat in Philadelphia. Nancy, thank you.
You're welcome.